Hey guys, today we'll be talking about Playwright, which is an automation testing framework. It is used to do end-to-end testing on new web apps. It can be used with React, it can be used with Angular. Most of the new web frameworks support this Playwright, which is used for automation testing in the new UI. We'll be talking about the advantages and disadvantages of this framework. We'll also be looking into some code examples on how to use Playwright with Node.js, writing a sample test case, and using the different components which Playwright provides and testing out the different components. So let's get started. So let's just start with a small overview on what Playwright is, what are the some advantages and disadvantages of it are. Playwright is used to do end-to-end testing on web apps. So basically like Selenium, where you would like to do some UI testing where you can click on a button, where you can input text, you expect something to happen. You expect something to happen in the UI like a toast message, like a alert, or something to change in the UI, things like that. So Playwright can be used for that. It can be used for projects that it uses React, Angular, and other web frameworks. It is also becoming more popular these days and replacing Selenium in some situations. I've seen some projects completely take apart Selenium and use Playwright because of some of the disadvantages of Selenium. Um, let's jump into the disadvantages of Playwright. So the main thing is that it's not supported in all the languages. It's only supported in JavaScript, Python, Java, and .NET, which are some of the most major languages. So I don't think of it as a big disadvantage. Um, but compared to Selenium, which is supported in most of the languages, Playwright was only supported in JavaScript, Python, Java, and .NET. The other disadvantage of Playwright is that it doesn't support all the browsers. It supports Chrome, Edge, Firefox, and WebKit. So for example, it doesn't support Internet Explorer, but if we look at it from a different angle, Internet Explorer is not supported anymore. So most of the companies and most of the projects shouldn't be using Internet Explorer anymore. So I don't think that is a big disadvantage either, but compared to Selenium, which supports Internet Explorer 2, it is a disadvantage. So let's get into the advantages of Playwright. Some of the advantages of Playwright are it's lightweight compared to Selenium. It doesn't have that many dependencies as Selenium has, so it's purely lightweight compared to Selenium. Selenium releases happen once in a while. We cannot depend on a release from Selenium because, for example, Selenium v3 was released 3 years ago and the new version was released recently. So the release cycle for Selenium is not something we can depend on. For example, if there is a defect, if there is a bug on it, we cannot depend on a release to happen soon. Um, Playwright is developed by Microsoft, so I hope they have a complete defined release cycle where things are released every year, every 6 months, or things like that. They also have patches to fix bugs, things like that. Playwright does have various checks, which waits before performing an action, which makes it less flaky when you write a test case. When compared to Selenium, you do something, you press a button, it doesn't wait for something behind the scenes, but Playwright does. It does wait for a lot of things. For example, you can wait for network to be idle, you can wait for specific actions, specific values to be filled in a field. So it automatically does all those checks for you before performing an action, which really does reduce flakiness in a test case. For example, if you're using Selenium with React UI, you probably will end up in situations where things are highly flaky and you have to add explicit, implicit wait times to make sure that those flakiness are reduced. There was a lot of blog posts saying that Selenium is highly flaky with React. It's because of how JavaScript is asynchronous with React, and it's kind of an added layer on React, which makes it really flaky. So Playwright kind of plays a really nice role there, making sure to wait for everything to happen and doing all these extra checks to reduce this flakiness. It is also faster compared to Selenium, which is a major advantage when compared to automation testing framework because you don't really want to be running a test case for an hour waiting for the test case to finish. while you can finish it in half an hour. So it is really faster compared to Selenium. So let's get started on installing Playwright and the browsers which we require for it. So I did go ahead and install both these things. So the first command which you have to run is npm install playwright /test. It's going to install the Playwright framework for you, which is used to write the test cases. The -d is used to make sure that the package is installed as a dev dependency for your project. The second command, that is npx playwright install, is to install all the browser binaries provided by Playwright. So Playwright provides you with browser binaries for Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit, and they recommend using that while you do the testing. It is the browser binaries are the latest browser versions, and this is to make sure that the Playwright protocols properly work with the latest browser protocols. You can locally test with the local browsers which you have installed on your machine, but they don't recommend you doing it because the protocols might not match and things might get flaky. So they recommend you installing the binaries provided by Playwright, which will make sure that everything works properly. So if we go into the package.json file, we can see that playwright.test was installed right here. That is the only package which we need for this tutorial. I'm now going to create a Node.js project completely with a UI or things like that. We're just going to go to a random website, probably just go to the npm package manager, go around there, create a small test case, and then use some of the components provided by Playwright. I did go ahead and add some new configuration files and an example test case using Playwright. So there's this new configuration file that's in the root of the project, which is called playwright.config.js. So when you run npx playwright test, this configuration file will be taken into consideration and the values from here will be used. I've only added two attributes here. That is, one is to channel, which is which browser to use. So in my case, I'm using Edge. You can use Chrome, Firefox, or whichever browser which you want to run the test case on. So if you want it to run on Chrome, you can just type Chrome. For now, we'll be using MS Edge, Microsoft Edge for this tutorial. The other option is headless, which is the same thing as it is on Selenium, where you want to run a test case on headless mode, or if you want to see it like the browser open up, you want to see each click, each input. So right now I've set it to false so that I can see on the UI what exactly is happening. And this configuration file will automatically be picked up by a Playwright when you run the test case because it's on the in the root of the project. If it's not in the root of the project, when you run the npx playwright test command, you can add npx playwright test dash dash config and the path to the config file so that that config file is used when you run the test case. So right now, let's get into our sample test case right here. So this is just a sample test case, just using some of the components to give you an idea of how to use Playwright. So we'll be importing two things. One is test and expect. So if you have used Jest before, Jest is a testing framework, and it uses expect to expect a value or something to happen in the UI, and then Playwright pretty much imports the same component from Jest to do all those expected conditions to be true or false in the UI. So we write a test here, page comes from Playwright. We use async await to make sure that we wait for some task to happen and then we only go to the next line. So we have the first line page go to, so we'll be going to the npm website for this tutorial. We expect the page to have a title saying npm, and then we have a promise here. So basically on Playwright we can wait for navigation. So if you know in your test case that you click on submit button, or you're clicking on a specific link which will take you to a different page, which will take you to a different link, then it's the best practice to wait for the navigation and click on the link. So we make use of this to make sure that after you click the link, we wait for the navigation to happen so that there's no flakiness in your test case. If we don't have this, there could be flakiness in your test case. So always make sure that if you think that it's going to take you to a new link, make sure you wait for the navigation to happen using this function which Playwright provides. Um, this is just a go back function. Basically, on your browser, you have the go back button. So same thing, we're just going into the documentation in NPM, and then we're going back to the home page again. Now we're making use of locators. So here I used a locator. So if any of you have used Selenium before, we make use of Selenium find element by ID, by class name, by XPath, and all that stuff. It's the same thing. It's called locator. So we're locating an element by text here. This can be changed into something like locate element by ID, and then this could be inside quotes. You can locate element by class by putting dot here. You can do pound sign right here. So all these things can be done using the locator. The Playwright documentation is really useful. They go through each and every use case and all the scenarios. So if you read through it, it'll be really useful for you. So now I'm just going to remove this guy here. So it's just the going back, and we have another locator which is going to look for an input field of type search. So inside the search field on the npm website, we're going to fill the input field with this text right here. So it's going to put Playwright as a text inside the search bar, just like you input or send keys in Selenium. It's the same thing. We're just sending a value of text into the input field. Just like the other wait for navigation, we're doing the same thing because there's some navigation happening when you click on the submit button. We wait for the load state. So this is just to give you a small understanding of some of the functionalities provided by Playwright. So there's this function provided by Playwright which is going to wait for specific things. So wait for load state can be used to wait for the page is loaded, document is loaded, or for network to be idle. So network to be idle basically means that all the responses and requests are completely done after moving to the next line of the code. So I'm just making use of this here to show you that there are these functionalities which you can make use of from Playwright. So we're just going to make sure all the responses and requests are complete. There's no more network activities happening once you click the search button. Um, this is not required here. There are some other arguments and properties which every function provides you. Depending on your use case, you can use all these arguments and properties, but that was not required there. I was just doing some testing. Um, and the other thing is, if you want to make a keyboard press, so if you want to click on an escape key, if you want to click on some kind of keys, you can do this. I'm just doing this here to make sure that we move outside of the search bar, and then we click on an element that has an href tag saying package playwright. Um, this is a hacky way of finding an element and clicking on it. You can always locate an element by what kind of field it is, if it's a button input field or if it's a tag, things like that, and then look for a text and all those properties. I just wanted to make this quick so that we're just going to do a small demo of it. So you click on it, and then at the end we're just doing a timeout for 10,000 milliseconds, which is just 10 seconds. So let's go ahead and run this test case, and it'll open up a browser for you because it's in so it opened it up. It did all that magic for you. It was pretty fast. It opened up on a different window for me, so I had to move it down here. So as you can see, those different properties. Oops, let me run the test case again. um, so the browser launched with a bunch of default properties. For example, it is a private window, so all these settings can be controlled from the config.js file right here, based on what the browser should be. You can control the time zone, you can control the locale, you can control the geolocation, you can control the screen sizes. Things like that can be controlled from this config.js file. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it about Playwright. There's a lot of functionalities and a lot of functions provided by Playwright. They have a really good documentation on each of these functions on how to use each of these functions. I will put a link to the documentation for Playwright and some of these functions which I've used here below the YouTube video so that you guys can make use of it. And then I'll also push this code to GitHub and then put the link for the GitHub repo below this video too. Hope you guys enjoyed this video about Playwright automation testing framework, on how to use it, on how to install it, and the configuration file and things like that. Please leave your feedback in the comment section, and we'll see you guys on my next video.